Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and thank you very much for joining us at this closing session of Agriculture Advantage, the case for climate action in agriculture. We know that it's around lunchtime and it's a little bit out of the main venue, so we really appreciate that you took the time to join us here. So basically this is bringing together a number of sessions that we have organized with a group of institutions over the last week to look at various aspects of this action agenda for agriculture. There were 6 sessions that were held during the last week. We'll be hearing about the outcomes of those discussions. This session and the last couple of sessions over the week were organized jointly by the CGIAR, Research Program on Climate Change and Food Security, CCAFS, IFAD, the International Fund for Agriculture Development, CTA, which is my organization, Technical Center for Agriculture and Rural Cooperation, Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, of course the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, Crop Trust, and other organizations. Of course, people here are very much in the agricultural sphere and they know the challenges that we're facing, that we have to think about feeding over 9 billion people that are expected by 2050, and food production has to increase by more than 60%. And this has to be achieved through transformation of the agricultural sector and also agribusiness. Despite this significance, we all also realize that the money, that's finance that's going into agriculture is minuscule compared to other sectors. And this is in stark contrast to what has been clearly identified in the NDCs in terms of the countries prioritizing agriculture within the adaptation as well as the mitigation agenda. So what we try to do in these discussions over the past week and today is to envision transformation of agriculture, calling for major investments in innovation and in agricultural development. Innovations that are world-class, that could bring real transformation. So it's to unlock all kinds of innovations in the areas of, for example, public-private partnerships. How do you make insurance available for millions of smallholder producers? How do you make climate informed advisories for smallholder producers? How do we capitalize on the huge breakthrough that's happening in digital technology and make it accessible to the millions of farmers that we have? Well, luckily there is a lot of investment that has gone into agricultural innovation and research over the last couple of decades. So we are not starting from scratch, but how are we going to ramp up and scale up so that these innovations and research results can contribute in a significant way to achieving the agricultural production that we need under a changing climate. So today we are coming, as I said, to a close of this session that we have had over the last week. So we'll have 2 parts this afternoon of our discussion. The first part will have a high-level, number of high-level speakers that will be addressing some of the key challenges, in terms of finance, in terms of partnerships, in terms of research, in terms of gender, as well as low emissions development. So we are lucky today to have our first speaker, His Excellency Luis Felipe Arauz Cavallini, Minister of Agriculture and Livestock of Costa Rica. So we are very happy to have you with us. We know that you are extremely busy with the negotiations. But Minister Cavallini was telling me that he really appreciates the opportunity to learn and exchange lessons with practitioners, with people who, with the knowledge and so on. So he really says, this is the part of the agenda or the weeks that he finds extremely valuable, to interact with experts, to interact with representatives of farmers and others, to really see what's the knowledge that we can exchange from the ground. So we greatly appreciate your presence, and I'm happy to give you the floor to give us your opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all. I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about how we need to achieve agricultural competitiveness under a low-carbon development pathway, and share some of the experiences of Costa Rica, the lessons we have learned, and the road ahead. When we're talking about feeding the world, we see clearly a relationship between agriculture and food security, and then how this is affected by climate change. And this is the conventional wisdom. Climate change affects agriculture, agriculture affects food security. But the relationship is by no means linear. We have many interactions between agriculture and climate change. We have interactions between food security and agriculture, and climate change and food security. And this is where the picture gets complicated. We start getting more complicated things. Agriculture has a three-way relationship with climate change. Agriculture is a victim of climate change through changes in temperature and precipitation that affects crops and livestock. Agriculture is also a culprit of climate change through greenhouse gas production, but agriculture has or holds lots of the things we can do to solve climate change. It's part of the solution because plants are the only organisms capable of capturing carbon. So the reduction of greenhouse gas is certainly a role in which agriculture has a say. But also, of course, we know agriculture contributes to food security, whether through local production or from producing money from exports and buying food in the global food system. But also, food security has an impact on climate change. And food security, as defined by FAO, we have the different dimensions of food security: availability, access, consumption, and biological utilization. And just to give you an example, consumption patterns have an impact on climate change. We know that, for example, 10% of the greenhouse gases produced by developed countries are due to the production, transport, preparation of food that is not ever consumed. It's just going to waste. Waste of food is a big culprit of climate change. But we think that agriculture can feed the world, and that does not need to compromise the environment, or working with the environment does not need to compromise the role of agriculture in feeding the world. But we do need fundamental changes in the way we produce our food. This concept of climate-smart agriculture basically encompasses adaptation, mitigation, productivity, and these three things together brings competitiveness or eco-competitiveness. And the key word here is smart ag. Why? Because we can say climate-friendly agriculture or use other terms. But the term smart means that this is agriculture based on knowledge, whether it is scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, or traditional knowledge. But we need knowledge in order to put this together to this. We'll see why. This conceptual framework will show you why. In first place, greenhouse gas production in agriculture result in many cases from system inefficiencies. For example, nitrous oxide, one of the main greenhouse gases produced in agriculture. Well, nitrogen in the different forms in the soil, fertilizers, have different environmental fate. One of these is nitrous oxide. And nitrogen is put in the soil to produce protein and to boost productivity. But then N2O is nitrogen that didn't go to make protein. So this represents nitrogen that did not contribute to productivity. Therefore, reducing greenhouse gas can increase in efficiency by lowering the cost, nitrogen that we don't put, or boosting productivity, nitrogen that is more efficiently used. Within this conceptual framework, the second concept is that agricultural systems provide opportunities for carbon sequestration, both in trees and in soil, and all this is very well documented. Mitigation strategies can improve adaptation to climate change through better water management, microclimate modification, especially by trees, nutrient management, and soil organic matter, which makes for better plant growth on the face of climate change. But, okay, that's the concept. How do we move from theory to practice to make this change feasible? And that's where knowledge comes. How do we do all this? We need research, we need extension, we need to demonstrate what works and what doesn't. And we're going to see the case of Costa Rica. This is another complicated figure, but gives you the theory of change with livestock. In Costa Rica, a livestock low carbon program has these components: live fences, rotational grazing, improved pastures, and improved fertilization. That would increase the number of trees, so that would increase the capture of CO2. And live fences also help us more efficient pasture and more efficient use of space, along with rotational grazing. That allows us to increase animal density and productivity, improve pastures. We have healthier pastures, better capture of CO2 in soil, lower emission of N2O, and also lower emissions of enteric methane. Improved fertilization also lowers the emission of N2O. And also the number of trees, because it provides shade for the cattle. When we have very warm temperature, the cattle goes under the shade. That decreases temperature by 5 degrees Celsius. That's data from a research institution in Costa Rica. And productivity goes up by 10%. The productivity by animal, whether it is gain weight or milk production. Let's see some data, because that's the theory. Okay, what we have seen with this program is an increase of the animal units per hectare. Up to 2016, we had seen this increase in animal units per hectare. We also have seen a reduction, or we can have the tons of, we have the data on the tons of CO2 equivalent captured in trees, within pastures and forested areas in the farm. And this is the emissions, 99% of which is methane from enteric and digestion from the cows. So with the trees, we are able to offset most of those emissions. We still don't have the data of carbon capture in soil. That is being conducted right now, but that would offset the carbon even more. Milk production has gone up with this in these systems also, compared, say, 2015 to 2016. So it can be done. We have data to prove it. The other pilot program we have is with coffee. And also, the main things we're looking at in coffee are good fertilization practice to reduce N2O, agroforestry system, which is a traditional practice in coffee plantations and has benefits, and also not only at the farm level but the mill level, residual water from the milling of the coffee. We are spraying on grasslands instead of oxidizing in lagoons, and waste management. Also, we are working on that, and I'll show you some results. We have found that by reduction or by reduction of rates and better sources of nitrogen, we have reduced N2O by 35%, without losing productivity. We have seen that instead of composting, which produces methane, we are going to gasification to produce energy, which reduces methane and N2O. And also, residual water treatment. Instead of using an oxidation pond, we spray in pasture, and that reduces carbon from this amount to this amount, the carbon equivalent per fruit produced, or fruit processed, I mean. Okay. This is the main players in this program. We have the FOMIN, the Multilateral Investment Fund from the International Development Bank. We have the German Cooperation Agency. These two have channeled funds for this. We have the Ministry of Agriculture, the Institute of Coffee, the Cattle Corporation, and the Ministry of the Environment as technical counterparts. And we have Funde Cooperación as the implementation agency that has helped to channel these funds. And these are the producers, coffee and cattle producers, because this is focused on the people, and the capacity building has been a big focus of this project. 3,000 people trained, 97 pilot farms, and 16 education materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Cavallini, for this really science-based presentation. It's quite impressive to have a policymaker, giving you evidence-based presentation. And obviously, if you look at his CV, he has been professor and also dean at the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Costa Rica. So he has that strong technical basis, to give us this presentation. So we can take one or two clarification questions, if you have, or comments before we go to the next speaker. Of course, at the end of the session, we'll have also time for discussion. But if there are any quick questions, to the minister, we can. Any? Yes, Bruce?
It's great you're having these concrete examples of successes. How can one promote lots of South-South learning on these kinds of things? Because I think it can be really stimulating for other countries to think about these sorts of things.
Yes. First of all, I only had 8 minutes to do this, so I couldn't go in detail. But first of all, we need to be aware that there's no one-size-fits-all. Every country needs to think along this, the conceptual frame, but adapt it to their own conditions. Second, generate the information, have the numbers, and develop the pilot. This has, as you saw, about 100 farms working in this so far. So this is going already to the farm level. So if you have the information, you have to disseminate it, and you have to replicate as much as you can so people get aware of this. And finally, you need to convince bankers and other finance organizations so they would, finance at the farm level this kind of things. So I think those are the main components.
Thank you, Minister. Any other quick question? Okay, let's go to our next speaker, Dr. Stefan Schmitz, with the Commission of Germany Special Program 1, World No Hunger. Well, Stefan is very familiar to many people. He's also director of the Food, Agriculture and Rural Development Directorate at BMZ. So, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Minister, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, that was a great example from theory to practice to show that always knowing and doing should come together. And therefore, I would like to focus now a little bit on the knowing side, on the agricultural research that we need to bring not just having knowing, but bringing knowing and doing together, and what research itself can do and should do to achieve that. Just before the World Food Price crisis in 2007, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, was the first amongst the CGIAR donors to invest specifically in agricultural research on climate change. At that time, this was still completely new territory to us that we had to explore. And look where we are now, 10 years later. Still a lot to do, but it is impressive where we are. With CCAFs, the CGIAR program, we have a strong cross-cutting, global integrating research program that addresses the urgent need for more and better evidence on the impacts of climate change in agriculture. Through our partnerships and collaborations, we have contributed to making agriculture visible in the climate change debate and the other way around. So bringing these spheres, agriculture and climate change together. And most importantly, we have made progress on the ground for and with millions of smallholders who are most affected by climate change impact. Yes, we have, as I said, still a long way to go. Agriculture is finally on the agenda of climate change negotiations, but not yet at its very core. But at least I see from COP to COP we make progress. This is good. With the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, we have made landmark achievements and crucial commitments, but are still struggling to bring them to life and speed up their implementation. Many joint efforts are ongoing to adapt our agro-food systems to climate change and mitigate their greenhouse gas emissions, as we have seen nicely before, but are still lagging compared to other sectors. We have been pushed out for far too long from this debate, and now we have to come up with that. Yeah. We have to increase total agricultural production substantially and sustainably to accommodate the rising demand for food. To tackle this formidable task under the increasingly challenging conditions, a transformative change towards a climate-smart agriculture is called for. Climate-smart agriculture with these various aspects we have seen on adaptation, mitigation, and production or productivity. Sustainably increasing agricultural production, accelerating adaptation of the agricultural sector, and where possible, and now we've seen it is possible, mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions to ensure food security and nutrition. Germany aims therefore to mainstream adaptation and mitigation measures within development cooperation and strengthen the discourse on agriculture in climate change. International agricultural research for development at the CGIAR and beyond is a key partner of and in these efforts. Research provides decision makers with better evidence on the impacts of climate change on agro-food systems to guide effectively policy programs and investments. And, likewise important, research continuously is putting the spotlight on the agricultural sector within the climate change discourse. So the importance of research goes far beyond creating more and better knowledge. That remains, of course, a prominent sphere, but this political aspect, this transformative power research can have and should have, is as important as the other aspect. To operationalize and implement the NDCs, data on actual greenhouse gas emissions and aerosols specific to each country and sector are indispensable, but are still limited, especially for the African continent. Therefore, research done, for instance, at IRRI's Mazingira Center in Nairobi, focusing on understanding and managing the environmental footprint of African livestock system without hampering productivity, is so relevant and timely. Just to take that as one example, a lot more needs to be done, and we do a lot more. However, all our efforts are in vain if we do not have new solutions to the persistent and new challenges that smallholder farmers in developing countries face. We need the sound, groundbreaking, and freely available public goods produced by agricultural research more than ever. This includes new technologies, management practices, and high-performance varieties adapted to extreme weather conditions, pests, and diseases. From the drought-tolerant bean varieties developed at SIAT to IRRI's solar-based drying technologies and the water-efficient irrigation systems of IMWE. Germany is a firm and long-standing supporter of international agricultural research for development since its very beginning. This includes the support of international gene banks that safeguard agrobiodiversity. But we need to do more and deliver tangible and widespread impacts on the ground for the many. Therefore, we call for more, not less, commitment to the publicly funded international agricultural research system. At the same time, research and implementations partners need to foster and forge more and closer partnerships. Only this way we can ensure that research products continue to make its way to large numbers of farmers in developing countries. With the One World No Hunger initiative of BMZ, launched in 2014, BMZ has invested 1.5 billion euros per year in food, agriculture, and rural development. The CGIAR centers, together with the World Vegetable Center and ECP, work hand in hand with many of our new created 13 green innovation centers for the agriculture and food sector that were set up by the One World No Hunger initiative. Against the backdrop of climate change, still much more needs to be done. In this light, we highly appreciate CCAF's efforts and dedication to unite us here today in the joint effort of promoting investments for climate action in agriculture. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we urgently need an inclusive, climate-smart development of smallholder agriculture in developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This is really very exciting and very encouraging when much investment in research is not where it should be to hear from, from you and from BMZ that you're really committed to supporting innovation and research within, the context of agriculture and climate action. Any quick questions for Stefan? Comments, questions? I'm sure everyone is happy and excited to hear this commitment, definitely. So, yes, Helga.
Thank you, Michael. So, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. My question is, how can we really, at the government level, enhance space for the private sector to invest more in agriculture and to help to a faster mechanization?
Well, very general and specific at the same time. Most important, I would say, increase work for better conducive environment for the private sector. That mainly, first and foremost, needs to be done at country level. And, well, there is also things to be done on international level, what in various trade negotiations need to be talked about, addressed when it comes in particular to development within EU or bilateral trade agreements, whatever. So trade is an important thing. Governance and institutions at country level are important to attract private investment. Yeah, and from this morning session, we had a very interesting discussion here on drought resilience as one example. Yeah, there is one example where all these aspects come together. Yeah, where food security, agriculture, rural development, and all that needs to work hand in hand, really, to improve resilience of people. And so I would say, as a final remark, we must start to think beyond just farm. Yeah. We must think of a whole agriculture and food sector and economy beyond. And if we take that into account and really go for rural development instead of agricultural development, and if research can support policy making in telling that story again and again, I think that would be really a good basis for private sector to come in, and that then you have a development that opens up for private investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And Tony.
Thanks very much, Stefan. Tony Simons, the Director General of the World Agroforestry Centre, one of the CGR centres. It's actually music to our ears to hear that call for greater research. Globally, we see ODA declining. We see the appreciation of research declining, and we see interest in agriculture declining. So if you're an organization that's funded by ODA doing agricultural research, we're really struggling. But that's not the case in Germany. And I think because of your appreciation for research, for development, and for connecting agriculture, as you've just said, through a wider agri-food system, I think Germany can show leadership. Because you said let's connect knowledge with the doing side. And what do we know? We know a lot on upstream discovery. We know a lot on getting things in place. But we've got to combine the science of discovery with the science of delivery. And the knowledge on how to deliver, on how to upscale, on how to connect with private sector, on how to link up with subnational authorities and agencies is suboptimal. And we need to connect those two things. And I think Germany is showing tremendous foresight and coming in at a time when we look in the SDGs, 17 goals, 169 targets, 231 indicators, 500,000 words, and the word research occurs 4 times. And that is a real sad indictment, if you like, on our appreciation and our ability to push that forward. So let's have these efforts. And I think if Germany wants to pick up the flag, combining the science of discovery with the science of delivery will ensure we reach that 2030 agenda quicker. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, we'll obviously have time for lots more discussion, but there's a lady here. I can't say no. Please.
Thank you. I'm Lucy Nganga from Kenya. And speaking from the developing country side, I think I wanted to just as a comment, just to enrich on what my colleague there asked about public partnership. And we have this flying statement that we always say that government to give conducive environment, and we leave it there. But coming from the policy side, I would say I think parties and countries need to unpackage that statement and ask themselves, towards climate smart agriculture, what are these conducive environments that we are creating, whether from the farm level to the value chain that like the speaker has said. Because just saying it and leaving it like we have always done with gender in our earlier arrangements. So let's unpackage that and see what are the conducive environments that we need to do. And I guess one of it is one of the sessions we had here, where the private sector must be also engaged in the policy making process. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll have opportunity to comment as well, unless you want to say quick words now. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the key is also partnership. We have to, and it's one of the issues that we'll be addressing, and we have been talking about during the week. We have to really look at the whole set of actors, to make this meaningful and effective. Not just research for the sake of research, but really research that translates into action in terms of policy and practice. So our next speaker is Margarita Astralaga. She's the Director of Environment and Climate Change Division at IFAD. Margarita will be talking to us about making finance accessible to smallholder producers. And IFAD has been really on the forefront of helping smallholder producers, and especially in getting access to finance.
Thank you, Michael. And it's a great pleasure to be here with today with all of you. We have been talking about the doing. And I think it's important, we all know, and I think Stefan was very clear, we need money to do a lot of what we do. Tony also brought it up, the importance of money to do research. So for all the work we have to do, all of us, money is, money talks, they say, no? So we wanted to bring up the issue of climate finance for agriculture. Because as we were discussing yesterday, only 2.5% of public climate finance goes into agriculture. And everybody today is very hungry because, of course, at this time of the day, we are all hungry. So it's important to remember that without food, there is no future, there is no development. So we will see in the next slides how we can see the difference, the big difference. Maybe, as it was said before, maybe it's because agriculture was not really in the Paris Agreement itself, although it's very clear in the NDCs. So also, it became very clear that what we need is rural transformation. What do we need then? We need, rural transformation. We need a sustainable increase of productivity. But at the same time, we have the obligation to adapt to climate change and to ensure the agriculture sector will contribute to that, not reaching more than 2 degrees, which is a big challenge for us. Even more if we don't have the money to do it, nor the research and information we need. So we need not just the money, but also the political will. In 2014, total investments in land use mitigation and adaptation was estimated in 7 billion, of which 3 went to adaptation. You will be very sad to hear that the total climate financing in that year was 391 billion, while only 7 billion went to agriculture, mitigation and adaptation. So as the minister presented a complex slide, I don't feel very bad about this other one. Maybe, maybe this one is a bit more complex. But I think the importance of this slide is to show the amount of financing, the landscape of climate financing. And we can see what happened in 2015 and 2016. So don't forget the figures. We said 2014 was 391. So we are very pleased to report that 2015 was 437. So it's good news. 2016, 383 billion. So hopefully it's not because Paris is too far away and we have forgotten about our commitments in Paris. And, but okay, still, if we take the average of both years, we see that we are better than 2014. So it's still very good news. So shall we be pleased with these kind of figures? Our problem, again, is how much of this is going into agriculture, into food security, into resilience in the rural sector, into the real transformation of the rural sector. So I was saying I wanted to refer to the doing, because in IFAD we have been trying to do a lot for the smallholders, which is our sort of raison d'etre. That's why IFAD was established, to help smallholders and small fishers. So with the ASA program, the Adaptation for a Smallholder Agriculture Program, which is the largest program worldwide on adaptation for this group of people, we have invested $300 million in 42 projects in 41 countries. And the program has been going on since 2012. Thanks to the generosity of several donors. We have 10 donors, and we hope that this will continue. But you can see that 300 million was only enough to provide support to 41 countries and 42 projects. But how many projects do you need, or do we need per country, to be able to achieve sustainable agriculture? So we have made a lot of progress in this, reaching 6.6 million farmers. But we say we have 500 family farms worldwide. So at this pace, when are we going to really reach this amount of people that are in need, that are very vulnerable and that have no other sources of income? We have managed to also support 180,000 households having better water availability. How many thousands and millions of households worldwide need water availability? So what we are trying to do now is to ensure that the lessons we have learned within ESAP are scale up. So we have learned a lot since 2012. We have learned that we need a systemic approach to the work we do, and we were discussing the importance of not working in silos, to try to really make sure that we are integrating all the aspects that will help us to have sustainable food systems. And now we are talking about food systems. The empowering of women, we see the difference that it makes every time we, and no offense, gentlemen, we love all of you, but in fact, in the rural areas, when we empower women, the children and the family have better nutrition, better access to health, better access to education. And even in some countries, we have heard that violence at home decreases, because now the women have to be healthy to work the land. So even that is a plus to empowering women in the field. Nutrition, again. We have a serious problem, as we all know, with lack of nutrition versus obesity. It's easier to eat junk food, non-nutritious food, than doing the nutritious food. So by empowering women also, by providing them the knowledge they need, we also help them in ensuring better nutrition for the children and the family. Then capacity building. I think we all know that capacity building is needed at all levels. In the agriculture sector, making sure that we understand the challenges of climate, but also the opportunities, because there is always, when there is a threat, there is always an opportunity. So we have been working very closely with our beneficiaries, with the government officials at the national level, with the local authorities in the rural areas, to ensure that everybody understands why climate and environment sustainability are important in our process. And the other aspect that we have been looking at is the mitigation co-benefits of the adaptation. So this is part of what we have learned and done. And now we are moving into the next phase of ASAP, using all the lessons that we learned with ASAP 1. So we are now moving into a program that will be having targets until 2025. But as Stefan mentioned, we probably were one of the first multilaterals getting into the mainstreaming of climate in our investments. And it's basically because it makes sense. It makes, first of all, financial sense for us. We have to make sure that we will not lose our investment because of climate. Therefore, we had to make sure that our investments would be climate-proof. But this new phase will allow us to work with other actors, not just the governments as it was ASAP 1. It will also allow us to fund a specific research and a specific technical assistance and work more empowering women in the rural areas. So it's a multilateral fund that was established by our board. The amended new version was established by approved by our board in December 2016. And we are very happy and grateful to announce that we already have 2 donors that are ready to support this trust fund. 2 Scandinavian countries, normally they are the first ones. So we are very grateful. I don't know if anyone is here, but we want to use this opportunity to also thank that trust. So here, talking about how hungry we are, we talk about, and I think, I don't know if all of you can read these, but a country cannot transition to electric cars or build green infrastructure or fulfill the Paris Agreement on an empty stomach. We are here all, or many, with an empty stomach, but what is important is that we are all here because we know that we require climate action in agriculture. This is undeniable for all of us that are here. And what we would like is to make sure that everybody else is aware of this very big challenge that we have. Why is it that our governments and even the donor community is not investing enough in climate issues in agriculture? We take it for granted, maybe, that we will have food forever. So now is really the time to say that all this group here represent the voices of the more than 500 million families that are smallholders around the world. But we need all of you. Everybody here can contribute to this climate action in agriculture. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margarita, for really showing us what IFAD is doing in real sense, to make finance available for smallholder producers to build climate resilience. Is very impressive. And your plan for phase 2, it's even more impressive. So I'm sure some of the donors are hearing, listening to your pleas. So our next speaker is Ismail Shunga. He's the CEO of the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, strong voice of farmers in Southern Africa as well as throughout Africa. So he will be talking to us about engaging farmers in the discussions on climate action.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. I think the last speaker on the last note gave a very good introduction to my topic, a farmer-based approach to scaling up climate action, rooting it in understanding the needs of farmers. I think that is where one can say that it is farmer-based, because you need to understand what is it that drives them, what is their psychic, what are their aspirations, what are their issues, what is it that they can do by themselves, what is it that they need help from others, how can they drive the agenda, how can they be given the space, how can policy address, and how can science and technology deal with them. But that all comes from the basic point of understanding. And there are different ways of understanding them. What is a bit frustrating from our side is that we see a lot of things happening. Research happening. We see a lot of finance going into the sector. We see a lot of information going in that direction, extension, but quite a few times, and significantly so, it tends to miss the point. That's the first point. I think that is an indication that there is not enough understanding. And that enough understanding, lack of it, that comes from different explanations, one of which is the danger that we always make, that we think that farmers are all the same, that their needs are the same, because that affects product design. If the product is designed with a homogeneous typology of a farmer, by default, you're getting it wrong. And don't blame the farmer when it doesn't work. Blame yourself. I think it's important for us to understand that. The second point is that because we are about farmers, we tend to look at them from the lens of farmers. We are looking at farmers, but maybe farming is a small part of them. There are a whole other things around farming, depending on the degree of commercial orientation of the farmer. Maybe the farming part of that individual or that community is small. So when you design products and services, maybe it should not be biased more towards what we want to see. You should be biased towards what the situation is saying. If you go for climate insurance, maybe that is not their main need. Their main need could be something else, but it does not mean that you cannot address both of them. Herein also information for product design. You can go for bundling solutions that enables them, insurance, to deal with other parts, to ride on those other parts that are more important in their lives. I think it's more about us as we understand farmers and as we try to design services and products that talk to them, because I think that's where I'm missing it. And the other point really is that if it has to be farmer-centered, it has to address large numbers of people, because they are the majority, at least in developing countries, of inhabitants. So it has to have the infrastructure that will enable it to reach out to many. That's the first point, the basic point, but it is talking to addressing a farmer-led approach, because there are large numbers. It has to also address their diversity, because they are not the same. It has to address the point of their limited education and knowledge to deal with what is now and what is coming. It has to deal with their understanding and appreciation. We heard earlier on about how sometimes research, development assistance is not sufficiently appreciating the importance of research. Research is important. So also farmers to understand the importance of climate change and how they are part of it and how they can use different instruments to deal with it, moving them from conscious ignorance to conscious ignorance, to conscious ignorance, so that they can begin to start something about it, to do something about it. So again, that to me is infrastructure. If you don't know what is hitting you and what might hit you sooner or later, and to what extent and when and how, your history right from the beginning, and to invest in that appears to be investing in something, but that is essential infrastructure. If you don't have a health facility, if you don't have a school, if you don't have social services, to try and say, let's talk climate smart, it's a bit too far away from them. I think that is reality. So the point being that when you are talking about climate action, that is farmer-based, it needs really to understand some of the very basic infrastructural stuff that needs to be there before one can begin to talk about the actual subject. Because that actual subject, that knowledge, that information, that understanding, that awareness, that practice, that experience has to flow through an infrastructure. If it's not there, basic roads, basic bridges, basic network infrastructure, we are not talking anything. It will still be fragmented. It will still be not so coordinated, and it will give us zero or near zero. So sometimes it is not so much about how much we're investing. It is about understanding where to put the investment, where it gives you the best back. I always give a silly example about, I have not been in the Army or in the Air Force before, but I can imagine that if one is trying to look at where to drop a bomb as a jet fighter, they just don't drop it anyway because they're farmers. No? You look at the point where it is going to cause the most damage, as it were. I mean, it's a silly analogy, I know, but I think it illustrates the point that if we don't invest time and money and resources on things that may appear so basic, we are not going anywhere. And it may not be exciting. It might not be exciting, but maybe those things that are not exciting may be the most important. I know researchers, I've been one before, want things that are exciting. But let's maybe redefine the meaning of excitement. It should be one that gives you large numbers, that is transformative, that makes farmers happier. And what best way of measuring the happiness of a farmer than money in the pocket? Less risk, more profits. If it is not addressing that, and I can imagine that a lot of research that we might have done is not resulting in that. So we should really self-assess ourselves as to whether the kind of focus and the kind of orientation that we're going for is really, really helping us. Concluding points, in my view. It is not only about what can we do for farmers. I mean, I think we also need to move away from that paradigm. The farmers themselves, if they don't take it upon themselves to say, what is it that we need? Rather than how do we create an enabling environment for farmers? They should be saying, we demand this enabling environment, rather than waiting for others to do that. It is coming from their realization. It is coming from their institutions. So investing in their institutions to help them articulate, not to wait to respond to NDCs developed by others, but to say, we think our NDCs as farmers are this, than to be mobilized by others. That which you are mobilized for may not necessarily last than that which you mobilize yourself for. And I'm sure I'm making a lot of sense on this. It's my English that may not be very good. But really, it is in the hands of farmers. And sometimes we are not using those hands ourselves to be able to wrestle the thing in our favor. But we're waiting for some other people to do things to us. I mean, a farmer or farmers should be able to say what we consider enabling for us is A, B, C, D. Rather than someone doing research. I mean, they can also do research. Research is not only for researchers. I mean, we are all researchers in our own ways. Maybe not as scientifically as other people, but maybe the results are the same. Who knows? We may not necessarily perfect that science, but working together, we are able perhaps to come up with better solutions. The core being that if it has to be farmer-led, let it come from the farmers themselves, and let it join hands with those that seek to support farmers. And finally, let's have a very basic infrastructure through which we are going to reach out to as many farmers as possible, as quickly as possible, and to try and have as the mass that we require. And digital technology should be a key solution. Digital infrastructure, investment in network infrastructure, connectivity might seem high-end, but maybe it's not as high-end anymore. That is what we need. That is part of the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ishmael. I think the key message is empowering farmers so that they can do what they want for themselves, not only just being helped by others. So I know Ishmael and Saka have been very proactive, especially in empowering farmers with data, with ICT access to phones and all that, because this is one of the way, that really is a game changer, and we're happy that we're working with you in this area. So any quick questions for Ishmael? Comments, quick questions? Yes, at the end, please.
Hi, my name is Keris Jones. I'm here with the World Farmers Organization, a member of the Farmers Constituency. Ishmael, can you say a little bit about the value of farmers learning from farmers? Because we find in the UK there's nothing that farmers like better than, as we would say, look over the fence and see what other farmers are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is very, as farmers say, we hear them quite often say that farmers learn more from their colleagues than they would maybe from other sources, which is not to say that other sources are not important. But if other sources are using farmers as a conduit of reaching other farmers, I think that actually has got a big multiplier effect, which is at a very lower cost than trying to approach them individually. We have seen that they are already doing so in many ways. And that's one point perhaps that I have to take the opportunity to address now that I forgot to address abusing the system, is that if you don't focus on the newer generation of farmers, then of course it is about now, but it is about the future. So if you don't invest in the new generation of farmers to understand all these things we're talking about, their increasing complexity and how they can deploy the right instruments, also developing products and services that are talking to the future of farming, to the new generation of farmers who are already learning through digital platforms. It could be a WhatsApp group of young farmers such as we have in Southern Africa that is already learning. This is an example that I can give directly to say, yes, it is actually happening not only in one commodity, not only in one age group. It's happening across borders. So you see something, knowledge and learning spreading like wildfire that is being shared by farmers, that is generated perhaps by one farmer, but spreads to all different parts. I think things are getting easier, but as they are getting easier, unfortunately, we don't see the flow of money getting easier into the pockets of farmers. That's what we need to work on as well.
Thank you, Ishmael. We'll go to our next presentation. Quick one over there? Yes, very quick. Please. Please, go ahead, go ahead.
I think it's also for that the farmer sees themselves as equal part of whole civilization, and they are not second-class civilization part, because they need an equal partnership in the cities. Also, they need the consciousness that they produce organic food and not any variable things.
Thank you very much. So we move to our last presentation in this session. Bruce, are you ready? So Bruce Campbell, who is director of the CCAFs, will be briefing us on the outcomes of these 6 sessions that took place over the last week, and what are the key messages coming out of these sessions.
Thanks. So we started off last week thinking about transformative change, and I'm going to be quite brief because I'm going to try and summarize what happened in a week, but you're hearing a lot of the things again, so I'm going to skip through it pretty fast. And one of the things we started with was, what are the elements of a systemic change, which Margarita's already referred to. There's no silver bullets out there. It's going to be a comprehensive approach to transformation. And thank God this is on the up there after Ishmael's really strong presentation. So crucial is strong farmer voice in the change process. Ishmael also mentioned this, the digital platforms that are going to be necessary in the coming generation. We've heard about technologies this morning, but once again, it's one piece of the pie. Absolutely crucial, mentioned by various speakers already this morning, the whole policy environment. So what is the agricultural advantage? Essentially, we're trying to make the case that agriculture is really important in the whole climate change debate, and it has to move forward. I was on an event at Subster in June, where actually when they sent me an invitation to come, it was just an invitation to participate. It was innovation and climate change. And it was all about wind energy, industry, etc. And there was no agriculture. And so I wrote back to them and said, surely there's innovation in agriculture and surely it's important. And so that's the state of it, is that agriculture does have to get on the agenda. We've seen this already. So one of the events this week was the land and water advantage. Great examples about solar water pumps, South-South learning from the scaling up that's happening in India, and surely this can happen in Africa as well. Drought, heat, pest-tolerant varieties that can be produced now with the modern techniques in 4 years, as opposed to decades in the previous generation of scientific research. And also on the social side, a whole lot of discussion about land rights and water rights. Oops, stopped. How do I keep it going? The connection is here. No, stopped. Totally stopped. And I'm afraid my memory is not good enough. Okay. I'm going to read it off here, unfortunately, unless you can get it going. No? It doesn't work? Oh, okay, good. If there's going to be a transformation in agriculture, it's also taking a gender transformative approach. A really strong case was made for how focusing on women can have many co-benefits other than the pure agricultural benefits. The feminization that's already happening in many countries, so how can we get behind that feminization? And just getting much more participation with women is going to help drive the transformation. In the program that I lead, we actually have budget allocations that have to be spent on the gender side, because we've realized that in the past it's just been insufficient attention. Oh my goodness me. Sorry. So then, yeah. So the next event was on low emissions, the low emissions advantage. You can try and get it working. Oh, there it is. So this is another point that you already made. Only 2.5% of public finance getting through to agriculture. There was lots of interesting discussion about how this is moving forward, the NAMAs. There's a climate smart lending platform, the Eco Business Fund. So there's a lot of activity around here. And I think some of the breakthroughs in agricultural transformation are actually going to happen when we do more research in this area and more action in this area than in the more traditional agricultural research. So it's increasing, but at small scales, and this was particularly focused on low emissions options, but it doesn't come with trade-offs. There can be long-term agricultural productivity gains, can be incomes for farmers, and many of the low emissions options are also building resilience. Okay, let's hope this goes. Yes. The policy advantage, there was a section on policy. and there was quite a lot of discussion about science policy interfaces and how to move policy forward. And I think one of the things that came forward was, let's not only think about the policy, but also about the implementation of the policy. So these should almost be science policy implementation of policies. The other thing is from the scales, in terms of working right from community to global scales along the full spectrum, getting the policies right across the scales, and also across the sectors. And I think other people this morning made this issue about making sure we work with the different sectors. So, for example, the solar irrigation in India, the farmers are selling excess electricity into the national grid, those kinds of issues. And the agricultural policy, actually making the transformation in terms of agriculture, may be driven by reforms in the financial system, in the insurance sector system, so that the kinds of policies that we must be thinking of is much broader than the agricultural policies. The breeding advantage, 60% of bean growing areas could become unsuitable this century because of the 2-degree warmer climate. So we're aiming for only a 2-degree warmer climate, and that's going to be troublesome for some crops, and particularly crops like beans. So crop breeding is crucial, and the point made that actually the genetic resources, the gene banks of the world are really important to maintain for future breeding efforts. The business advantage, this was a point from Tony yesterday. For every $1 of ODA, there's $24 in domestic finance. How do we leverage the ODA to drive a transformative agenda? The importance of public-private partnerships and the whole area of blended finance. So some of the priorities that came out, and there's many, and we will, from each of the events, there will be a website where you can see some of the priorities, but just some of a few of them, taking this gender transformative approach, the strong farmer organizations, in many sessions, the importance of digital agriculture, the working across the sectors, the banking sector, the agricultural sector, the energy sector, the technologies, increased investment in climate actions in agriculture. How do we make sure that agriculture is on the agenda of these innovation events, for example? The business case for long-term adaptation. So how do we, it's pretty boring perhaps, to keep gene banks, and how do we finance gene banks? How do we keep the genetic resources around? And I think this one was really made yesterday, the importance of the private sector in driving transformative approaches. So the fantastic thing that happened yesterday was that there was a decision on agriculture. And if anybody's I've been following the negotiations since 2009, and it's a very boring process. And 6 years they've been discussing in Substa, and this is what they got to yesterday. So, you know, it's a fantastic outcome that finally in the official forums there's going to be discussions. But I would also say that what's happening in the bond zone is fantastic in terms of agriculture. So we must really continue the discussions outside the forum as well. And just to say, this is we're working with the UNFCCC, and this is the kind of thing that's happening in the outside. Working with the National Adaptation Planning process, the kinds of options available. Many of you working with the GCF, agriculture's on the agenda. So the things are happening outside the negotiations, and I think if we want to push the negotiators, we must do more work outside and really keep agriculture on the agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We'll have to make a slight change in our program. We have a very busy person among us, Roberto Ridolfi. He has squeezed some time to come and speak to us. He to keep changing his program because he's called upon to speak at different venues. So Roberto, if you could come over. Roberto is a director of Prosperity and Planet in the European Commission. And it's really quite fortunate because many of the issues we are talking about private finance, leveraging public funds for private finance. This is an area, a major initiative that Roberto has been involved in the last few years, and I'm sure will be very enthusiastically addressing those issues. So without taking any further.
Thank you, Michael, and sorry for, perhaps I hope to be useful to you, because certainly the research scientists in agriculture have been very, very useful to me. For what I do every day in development cooperation at large, and for what I am as a person. Therefore, thank you guys. I just plug on the fantastic presentation you have done, well done, because he said, look, we should start perhaps researching on the financial ideas. Why not? If bankers pretend to do your job, I think you can pretend to do their job as well. And is any banker in the room? Very good. Is any private investor in agriculture in the room? 2, 3, 4. Okay. Is any farmer, small order? Second job. I was saying this joke in Uganda when all ministers were coming to ask funds for agriculture. And I was saying, I thought you were a minister. No, I have a farm. I have an agriculture. So the real point is really to scale up what you do. And therefore we need not only money, I would say, but also some smart ideas around. Certainly blended finance has evolved a lot since we introduced in 2008. At the beginning was only to assist government guaranteed loans. That's what the IFAD does. That's what we shall continue to do. But on the side of that, we shall do direct to private operators. Now, we start from the big ones. We need a framework of due diligence. FIO, IFAD, CTA, other institutions are very well placed to set the rules of the due diligence for big investments in agriculture. We have the voluntary guidelines for land tenure. They must become compulsory for the big investments in agriculture. So let's make it palatable also for the investors, because I guess that the discussion was done a little bit among the usual suspects. When we do that, then put that for the European Union at the basis of our external investment plan as a condition. Number 2, the sustainable investment guidelines for agriculture, again, at FIO. They shall become now operational guide, real practical tools that the investors look with his lawyers, her lawyers, and then they have to agree in order to proceed. Safety standards, labor standards, environmental standards, you name it. So I'm not talking to reinvent anything. Use what you have invented collectively for becoming compulsory for the investment. Because the investments are coming. The investment plan of the EU is a big innovation in that sense, as we provide guarantees. And for the first time, it may be escaped to you, but we asked the European Union budget to lend a contingent liability to us. So the development people, we went to the hard rock of the European financial gotha, and we told them, look, we want that you extend to us a guarantee of 750 million. It's not big compared to the budget of the Union, but it's the first step. The second point is, of course, that you are the people that we are very, very interested in telling how agrobiodiversity can make money. And I think you told us. Not completely, I still need to round up the figures, because that is a very convincing argument for Wall Street to introduce an index on agrobiodiversity, and therefore, coming from the financial world, the push to reduce chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and so forth. I think it's up to you to demonstrate the economic case. So I invite very strongly to push on that. Biodiversity is engaged in that. I personally had a chat with them. But you all, I think, are engaged in finding ways, smart ways. So in a way, I agree with you. You should research on how to bring that into the financial markets, like Bloomberg did 30 years ago. You remember renewable energies were nowhere. They were expensive 30 years ago. Some of you were not around. Renewable energies were nowhere, too expensive, no economic case, therefore nobody was investing. Then they started introducing an index for the industrial sector to certify how much that particular company was using renewable energy or not. It was an index introduced little by little. Then it came into Wall Street. And then people started looking at the big energy over companies consuming a lot of fossil fuels, and those that were more modern trying to consume more renewable. And the market was starting to give a reward to that. So you need to set the scheme, and the big shots in dark suit in Wall Street, they will do the rest. Wouldn't it be wonderful that they plug trillions into biodiversity? For us, we shall be happy. So we have to find that way to inseminate our culture into their thinking. And that is not easy sometimes. So private sector is important for us, research institutions are important for us, but ultimately are the farmers. And I say in many public speaking that farming is not a noble word. Farming is associated with poverty, sufferance, subsistence, difficulties. Well, I think if you are two different farming, if you are cultivating some Bordeaux vineyards in France and you're making a lot of money with it, you are a farmer that I would like to be. If you are in Emilia-Romagna with Parmigiano Reggiano or Prosciutto di Parma, maybe I could be a farmer that I like to be. That is what we have to change. Now we go in Karamoja, in northeast Uganda, and we have to try to see, but not us, is the Karamojong that has to see itself or herself in somebody, making that kind of life. If we don't manage this, we are failing. And it's difficult, of course. But then you can't complain that, the countryside is empty with young people because everybody moves to the city. We can't complain that everybody wants to dress a suit and go to Harvard instead of cultivating potatoes. We can't complain. We are crying on ourselves if we don't have this cultural shift in people looking at farm. In Italy, I talk about, somehow it's happening in France as well. Certain organic farm, okay, these are niche. But we have to see what is good in the trends, pick it up, and go forward. That is, for me, a fantastic exercise. Why don't we do a research on that? On how to change the perception of being a farmer like being a loser in life. I'm sorry to be crude, but that's the thing. If we don't see the nobility of that word of farming, we won't see any historical change because there will be no drive. We can't drive that. Banks cannot drive it. It's the very farmer people. 2 minutes left. I finish. So 3 things. The EU-Africa Research and Innovation Partnership on Food and Nutrition Security and Sustainable Agriculture is one avenue for us to do this kind of partnership or research with national research centers. The European Investment Plan is the place where I think I will have to convince, and I will do it, because we have done very well, that FIO, IFAD, and the other agricultural think tank, they play a big role in the investment segment, in the big money. You need to play a big role in the decision of the EIB or the decision of the World Bank or World Bank is easier because, you know, they are used to listen to you. But it's not as easy, for example, that equity funds listen to you or pension funds listen to you. And that's, I think, a shift that we have to do. The external investment plan of the Union that I have the honor to have drafted, first step, that was an attempt to change the way to do development. Now we need an attempt to change the way to see agricultural private sector agent in the way they do things. So for me, the example of the agro-biodiversity index is the paradigm change that I would like to show to you. Like Bloomberg did 35 years ago, let's try to think on how we can change the appreciation of biodiversity in the big food industry without using development money, but making use of the normal money, the money that is there. So to shift the understanding, this is a consumer perception problem, there is a producer understanding, there is a corporate, you would know that many illuminated CEOs are having troubles with their boards. I don't mention the names, but we know a very big food company in the world stage whose CEO has been prominent in development, sustainability, and so forth, that is having his own problems with the board. Because at the end of the day, they look for certain profits. And I think we have to say that the farmer in Karamoja, I talk of a region that I know, has to become profitable. Profitable. This is an ugly word, but we have to use it. Otherwise, we go nowhere. So I want to tell you that I will shift totally. I will devote myself to agriculture and agro-industry because I've done too much for energy and for other sectors. Now I think it's time to look to the most important aspects, and you are the holders of a very profound and very useful knowledge. I think your presentation was brilliant. I would like to have it. PowerPoint, and I would like to have the proceedings of this, and I'm sorry for the changes in my intervention to you today, but I thought that was important for me to transfer these 2 words of hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I think this is the second piece of good news we heard this afternoon in terms of more investment coming the way of agriculture, and the EIP is quite huge initiative. Roberto didn't mention. I think the plan is to leverage up to 44 billion euros of private sector funding, you know, through public, mobilizing public resources. So I don't know if you have time for a few questions, if there are any. Well, look at the number of hands here. Okay, we start here on this side.
The most dangerous are the friends.
Mr. Ridolfi, I raised my hand 3 times because I feel I'm a banker. I have to know the banking talk. I'm an investor also in development. And I'm also happening to be a farmer, a biological cheese farm in South Tyrol. Maybe on this note of hope, there was mention also by Bruce of PPP models and eco-business. I represent Finance in Motion here, and I want to say with great support from the BMZ and the EU, we are advisor to the Eco-Business Fund in Latin America, and we're building more green funds. Altogether, our PPP funds are almost $2 billion US now in size, and we're moving more and more into the green field. And what is also good, the Eco-Business Fund has been very successful, and we've run many PPP models. Usually the best time to get private investors in is like after year 3 or 4. The Eco-Business Fund has been very early on, very interesting to the institutional investor segment. We've got a large Dutch savings bank, ASN, invested, and the German ethical bank, GLS. So it's been a pleasure for us. The topic is right. We may not be at the forefront when new research is being made and transferred into the farming sector, but working through the banks, I think we're able to increase the speed of change. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Rodolfo. Look at agricultural certification. And I think the EU can play a real leadership role here in terms of standards. Because the health sector is way ahead of us. There's 200 causal factors for heart disease. But the health sector knows that smoking, high blood pressure, and cholesterol account for 75% of heart disease. And that's what they focus their public awareness, their investments, their monitoring and reporting on. It drives change. What do we do in agriculture? Sorry, so what do we do in agriculture? What do we do in agriculture? We have to have 200 indicators. In Global Reporting Initiative, there's 400. The smallest is RSPO, and they have 36. Where's the equivalent of the 5 standards? You know, we know that it's net primary productivity, soil organic carbon, higher plant diversity, water balance, soil organic carbon, strength of farmer institutions, gender representative in farmer groups, and legal rights to farmers. What are those 5 to 10 key metrics that tell us 80% of what we need to know? Forget about the noise in the other hundreds. And the EU, working with German partners and others, can build up something that drives performance. What is performance? It's productivity, profitability, environmental sustainability, good governance and ethics, and social inclusion. Let's focus on that, and that will drive your investments and get Bloomberg excited. Because if we end up with shopping lists, you know, and scientists love to go that way, we will follow the trouble. So let's champion the health sector approach of focusing on key proxy metrics.
Yeah, let's take the last one. Yeah. A lady. Yeah. I don't want to put myself between you and the coffee.
My name is Gabi Ram. I'm a member of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. And with excitement, I have listened to that, what you were saying. But I'm afraid I have to be crude right now because, I mean, we also know that part of the policy of the EU contributed to really bringing a collapse of the economy, especially in African countries, to small farmers. So what is the EU going to do to revise these kind of adverse impacts on this kind of agricultural policies? It's nothing
Thank
new.
You.
Yeah,
no. It's so new that it's old and obsolete. It is, I think, even useless in the sense that I would have expected an American to come with that, and I would have answered, but your export subsidies ruining everything. But that was what I was doing 20 years ago. Look, let's continue to be positive. First of all, to our business banker and farmer, I think is a good guy. Can I have your business card? Finance in Motion, yes, we are supporting it in Latin America. Now we need to support in Africa. So please send me a concept note by next week. I think you mentioned the ethical bank here in Germany. I can mention the Banca Etica, the ethical bank in Italy. And they are trying to do fantastic things for the micro holders. Not small holders, micro holders, because that's the area where Michael has been working, and we know that no bank will go there unless we push them, we kick them to go there. Agricultural certification, Tony, fantastic. But the EU probably is not the best place to look at it because we are complicated. Everybody wants to have its way. First of all, with the indicators, it's your fault, and your fault, collectively. On the SDGs, who has negotiated the SDGs? Not me. Not the SDGs. 17 is okay. Then 186 targets start being... and then 600 and what? 95 indicators. It's not me. And I know you are hiding, but there must be somebody here. So that one, you take it back. I don't want it. I agree with you. We would need to have 5, 8, 6 big things on which... In development, we can do it because the Pareto law applies. 80% of the quality of a problem are inside 20% of their factors. So in that one, I can help you. And that's why you have heard me in the last few years saying, let's concentrate. Let's not do everything. Let's do. So I agree with you. And Tony, next week, send me a concept paper on what could be the objective framework attached to the window on agriculture of the external investment plan. There is a paper which I will circulate. Roberto is here. Roberto is here. Can you see that guy over there, Roberto Aparicio, our climate change agricultural expert? Roberto will circulate the windows for agriculture to all these people. This is approved, so don't touch, don't start complaining. But this is a short document for bankers, development bankers, to build financial products on which to develop different ideas and PPPs, etc. I would like that you see that document as a starting block, and then you attach, I think, your ideas on what could be the 6, 7 real objectives that we should target first, because these are very important. I would stop here because on Bloomberg, Rockefeller Foundation and Bill and Melinda Gates, I want to give you the good news that they want to put money in the investment plan of the Union. So it's not only a question we want to ally. They see that there is a certain traction for private investments because you have to do in a big scale. If you do in a small scale, then you risk that everybody will go to Kenya and nobody go to Burundi, or nobody goes to Central African Republic, or nobody goes to South Sudan, unless you have 20 million and you want to invest in Central African Republic agricultural schemes. So you don't have that. And in order to have out of 10 investments, 1 or 2 going in a fragile situation, you need to hedge the risk. So the others will compensate the losses that you expect to have, in a sense. There was a big question last week at the European Union. But with this investment plan, you expect to have losses. Yes. Yes, in 25 years we expect to lose some 25% of the capital of the fund, because a guarantee fund that will not look at taking risk in very difficult situations will not be for development, will be for Wall Street, and that's not what we are. So that was a funny question.
Just one more from Stefan.
Yeah. If I may just a comment to what Tony and Roberto you said regarding this health sector approach. A small group of like-minded donors, call it friends of SDG 2 and colleagues of you, Roberto, we try to clandestine cooperation already involved in that. Yes, we exactly work on this. And we try to adopt the same approach health sector does with the Lancet series, and so we exactly start to answer these questions. What are the key 8 or 10 intervention in the ag and food sector we have to address to reach, to get to SDG 2. So thanks for underlying that, encourages us to really follow that approach. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Any last words? Thank you very much.
So now is a coffee break. No?
We have maybe a few
more minutes.
Yeah, for questions.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert. So we still have about 15 minutes before coffee, and the plan is to have questions and discussion with the last panel. So may I ask the Excellency and the others, Stefan, if you could come over here for any. So any questions, comments to the presenters earlier? And Bruce, where is Bruce? Do you want to come over also? So we have about 15 minutes. If you can have quick questions, comments. You are either tired or you have enough information, overflow. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm a student assistant at CCAFS, and I keep an eye on the social media and the online channels through which we are broadcasting this event. And one person posed a question on YouTube, in this case, to Mrs. Astralaga about the comments you made about mobile phones. So I don't know if this is the best question to start with, but let me raise it. The person said, Mrs. Astralaga said that they have given mobile phones in developing countries to facilitate access to many transfers, climate information, etc., with a great beneficial impact. If it's so easy, can't we team up with Nokia and spread 10 million phones throughout Africa? That would only cost about 200 million euros, I estimate. well, the person didn't write his sources, but well, I think it's an interesting question.
Thank you. Should we take more questions? Any? Well, let's maybe Margaret.
Hello. Yes, I think that's a great proposal. And I think we go back to the issue of the money. Because as I was saying, we have the largest adaptation program for smallholder agriculture in the world, and the total is 300 million. So if it's only 200 million euros, that's $300 million. So if it's only 200 million euros, I'm asking Stefan to sign a check. And I would be extremely happy to be able to support that request. And I think it goes back to the issue we discussed earlier on the little amount globally that is being used for agriculture when there are so many opportunities to invest in agriculture. I think it takes us back to those sort of sad numbers. 7 billion from 391 billion, only 7 going to agriculture, into adaptation and mitigation. So as soon as I get the checks, maybe not just from Germany, from others, we will be really pleased to be able to help to achieve that in Africa.
Let's wait with the. Yes. Let's wait with the check for another few weeks. Perhaps under new German government. Indeed, as you know, we were happy to be able to contribute to ASAP 1. And we hope that we can continue to stay as a really committed funder, because I admit that is one of the key programs we have. One of the key programs addressing that particular issue. We need, I wouldn't say we need more of these instruments, it is we need stronger instruments. Instead of thinking all the time of new instruments, and so the few instruments we have, the multilateral, they are good. Starting with the CGIAR system, the GASP Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, IFAD with the ASAP program, there are a handful of key multilateral programs that need to be strengthened. And I hope that we will be able to do this in the 4 years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gerd Fleischer from GIZ here in Bonn. I found it interesting to see the different perspectives here in the speeches, especially from what we can say from the ground level, the farmer's point of view versus the EU point of view, external investment plan, or other donors, the ASAP. How could you imagine that farmers, and you said that the institutions of farmers should be strengthened, how those farmers could access these donor funds from Wall Street or other big investors in the global financial scene? How could they actually, how could we bridge this gap between the ground, where we have the needs of the farmers, and the global financial institutions?
Yes, let's take maybe one or more questions down there, please.
You said that there was a thing about money. It would be easy to face all the problems of smallholder farmers. How can smallholder farmers coexist with commercial farms? Even if I think we have seen many examples of smallholder farmers investing in machinery, in tools, in seed, but still cannot compete with commercial farming. You know. How can build market for both and or make fair for smallholder farmers to do that?
Okay, and next, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Danush Dinesh from CCAPS. I just think today is such a beautiful day. You know, we started with a decision on agriculture, which we've been waiting for several years, and you know, the ministers set out a pathway for low carbon development. Margarita spoke so eloquently about tapping and scaling up climate finance. Stefan spoke about transforming agriculture research for development under climate change. Ishmael brought the farmer perspective. Bruce made the business case almost about different advantages of investments. So what next? I'm just sitting here wondering, so such confluence of all these different thoughts, very positive. So what do we need to do next? Maybe panelists could comment.
Thank you, Danish, for making my life easier, summarizing the afternoon. Let's just do one more. You had one question? No? Okay, so the question was, how do we make finance accessible to smallholder producers? How do we link smallholders to large-scale farmers? So I'm sure, do you want to address?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. The issue of bridging the gap between the needs on the ground and the global financial markets or systems, it's important. But the point from where I stand is first of all to understand that money comes later. It is more about the idea that you have and the systems and the infrastructure as well as the environment that enables the idea to flourish. Then money comes in as an oiler for things to happen. Quite often we are starting with money, and sometimes we are letting money chase a bad idea because we are using money as the entry point. I think the entry point really is to understand the business model at any scale and look at how can money come in. I think once that has been sorted, sometimes the other side falls into place quite easily. There are people who know that this is a good idea and it can be financed this way. Where we are coming short, really, particularly in the smallholder sector, is just putting together that idea and demonstrating that it is bankable, and then look at the options for getting it financed. It may not necessarily require finance. It might require just startup finance. It might require long-term infrastructural finance. But I think we are starting from the wrong end in many ways. Then the other point related to that is sometimes the pipeline is too long. That you hear that there's a lot of money out there, which is looking for projects and it's not finding them. But even if it was finding them, it then trickles down to, it falls into sort of pittance in many ways. That it's not large enough given the demand at hand. Hence, the innovations about using public money to leverage more and using them in combination so that we can work faster. The issue of smallholders competing with scale, I think we need also to be very realistic about who are we speaking about. I think this is my earlier point about the need to differentiate smallholders. There are some who are not for the market, and it might not necessarily be an amusing thing to say. There are some who would require totally different instruments than commercial instruments. If you buy equipment and other things for them, maybe you are not doing them good. You may actually be doing them harm. So let's really look about who are we talking about, what is the right business model for each of those different types, and how best can they be assisted to reach their own ambitions. Then the final point really is the question about so what is next. For me, one of my takeaways from this meeting has been that the focus of research needs to be broadened. I think we need behavioral scientists, we need psychologists to begin to make us understand why we behave in certain ways, because I think we've much more gone more to the scientific, but much less about the human behavior and how they react and how they perceive things and how they set goals beyond. So my core is really, let's broaden up and call in rather non-conventional type of disciplines into research.
I was just going to suggest that maybe you can have one key message or what you see the way forward, as a way of closing up this discussion. So, Excellency.
Yes, thank you. To me, one important point is looking at climate change in a very, as Bruce presented it, in a very integrated manner, climate change and agriculture. We have to make the point that climate change is not an environmental issue. It's a development issue, and it has many, many aspects that we need to address. The other point is that we, as Tony said, we need to prioritize, and there are some big aspects that we need to look at. One is the science, both the physical, biological science, but also the social science, to not only better understand, but also to better communicate what is going on, and having this, and this communication has to go not only in the farmer technical direction and the other way around, but also to the investors and to the bankers, so they're also convinced. That is a very important multi-way communication system. And finally, I think how to bridge that gap between the international funding to bring it down to growers. I think, again, every country needs to devise their mechanisms to do that. And I can talk about the Costa Rican experience, which is probably, I mean, it's not the only way, and it's probably not the best way, but we have like implementing agencies like Funde Cooperación, who is represented here by the director of Funde Cooperación. They have been able to channel funds directly from big international sources to the ministers of agriculture to do piloting, but also to the growers with small loans. The Bank for Development is another case in which the Bank for Development brings in money from local banks, but also from international banks. They're in the process of accreditation for the Green Climate Fund. And the idea with them is also to channel money to small and micro enterprises and farmers. And in their directory board, we have the Minister of Industry and the Minister of Agriculture, so we can direct their policies towards where we want that money being allocated. So that kind of mechanisms are being in place in other countries similar to that. So the international monies can be channeled and get to where they need to go. And now I have to make a difference, because you can invest in giving the fish, or you can invest in teaching how to fish. And I think that makes a whole difference in the impact you have for the dollar invested. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that in our case, IFADS only works with smallholders, so we don't really invest in the big agriculture companies, business companies. However, for us, it's extremely important to have the farmer organizations and the farmer groups united, because one person cannot set the price of the produce. But if we have a farmer organization, we may be able to provide one tractor for the whole organization that will help the whole group of farmers. So what we do in IFAD is that although all the money goes to the government, it goes for the farmers. It's not for the Ministry of Agriculture to invest in whatever they feel they have to invest. But when we prepare the country strategies, we go to the field, to the remote areas where we are going to work to identify their needs. Because I think as it was identified, in every country, in every remote area of every country, the needs are different. So our investments are very focused on the needs of those communities. But we also look into the value chain from the beginning. So this produce is going to go where? And to that where, and that whole value chain, which we ensure that is a green value chain, we then come to those big other companies that are going to buy the produce. Sometimes chocolate companies need chocolate. They produce the chocolate in Europe, but it's produced in our countries. So it's making sure that we are able to link those producers that are producing sustainably to reach the markets. So that way we link this financial support also with the small farmers and with the markets, so that we sort of close the loop. So we help them not only to improve the way they produce, they harvest, but also how the quality control, extensionism, teaching them how to do better production. So it's sort of, we ensure that it's a full cycle. I think on the challenges for the future, then we have a lot of them. But I think we have made some progress, I think, in the value for money issue. Politicians, particularly, want to know, if I invest $1 here, how much is that I'm going to get out of it? And I think in the climate and the environmental sort of arena, we've had a problem not being able to demonstrate how good it is for them to invest in our areas. And we made some progress with the economic advantage. Whoever hasn't read it, please go and read it, because it's a very interesting publication. I don't think we mentioned it here. But we have to go deeper into that. How much money we are really saving with every dollar we are investing in adaptation and in environmental sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. I once again wanted to pick up this question of big farms, small farms. I mean, I don't want to sound naive. I know, we all know, all around the globe there's very strong competition forcing farmers to either move up or move out. That happens all over the place. However, I think for a long time, not to say forever, there will be scope and place for smallholders, even in a highly industrialized and developed country like Germany. In the East, we have large farms, thousands of hectares big. Here, if you take the train from Bonn to Cologne, 10 kilometers out of town, you have small farms, 5 hectares around, highly specialized, close to markets, design things, everything. But what they have is they cooperate. They cooperate. And the degree of vertical and horizontal integration into market and cooperation is, I would say, is perfect. But these farmers, of course, they need to be integrated and they need access to capital. They need access to those. And that is a point that is still missing in many parts of the world. That access for producer organization, user groups, this missing middle between public financing for public goods and the big private investments, this missing middle, I think we really have to address this, and we've tried to find ways how to, from development cooperation point of view, together with multilateral organizations, we are able to address that missing middle. That would be a real a key challenge for me, one of the key challenges.
So I'm a Zimbabwean, and there's another Zimbabwean on the panel, so I have to be a little bit careful about what I say. But the farmers I know best are smallholder farmers in southern Zimbabwe. And they have to transform in the next decade if we want to achieve the SDGs, and they want to get out of poverty, and they want to adapt to the strange weather patterns that are hitting them. So there's a decade challenge to transform what we see in southern Zimbabwe at the moment, and that same pattern is around the world. So I think, in answering to Danush's question at the back, is really what is a transformational agenda? That's what we have to tackle. And what are the elements of that? And we have to spell out the different pieces of that. So I think that's the top priority for me, working with farmers to understand what needs to be done.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have overrun our time by a few minutes, so I wouldn't take any more time. But we had, I'm sure you'll agree with me that we had a very exciting and really informative session. Greatly appreciate our panel speakers who brought a lot of experience and foresight into all this discussion. So please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you very much. So we'll have a coffee break about 25 minutes. And then we come back here for part 2 that will be moderated by my colleague, my friend Tony Simons. And I'm sure it will be very exciting and very interesting. So please come back in about 25 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And a real sincere thank you for staying on for part 2. I know it's very tempting when the VIPs and the ministers and others have spoken to run out to another event, but you are the faithful, and you shall be rewarded this afternoon because we've got a fantastic panel of 4, and so we leave it up to the, I'm a scientist, and they often accuse scientists of exaggerating, but we leave it up to the 60 people in the room and the 840,000 people watching it online. Give or take. No exaggeration at all. Yeah. So our panel this afternoon comes from a very diverse spectrum of perspectives. We have immediately to my right Olga Speckard, who's the head of Global Insurance Solutions at Syngenta Foundation. Not Syngenta the company, but Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture. Next to Olga, to the right, we have Paul DeSanka. Now, Paul is the manager of the adaptation program of the UNFCCC, from a different perspective. To the right of Paul, we have Sophia Haya, and she's the Gender and Social Inclusion Leader in the CCAFS program. And making up the last member of our panel, we have Jonathan Mokshel, from originally from Ghana, but a research fellow here at the German Development Institute. So we're going to pose a couple of questions to them and then open it up to interaction and dialogue with the audience. And I understand as well there may be some questions for all of those viewers online listening as well. So Paul, first question to you. We know that agriculture is key priority for adaptation in all countries, even though it has been left out of the negotiations largely to date. But, I mean, let's imagine agriculture was a party, one of the states, you know. It would be the size of China and Russia and the US and Canada all combined. It would have a population of 3 billion people, and it would be responsible for 25% of admissions. Now you can imagine where they would sit in the party negotiations, at least on the high table. But then why is agriculture so left out? But when we look at adaptation and its role for some of the more minority parties behind agriculture, it's been included in INDCs, but our question to you is, what real guidance in national adaptation plans can you offer and share with the audience here today about how we break this deadlock of some of that neglect of agriculture?
Thank you for the question, and glad to be here. I apologize I was not able to follow in person the rest of the sessions, but I was one of the ones that was following online, so I'm glad for that opportunity to listen to some of the talks that went on before this. Under the convention, there's a process to formulate and implement national adaptation plans. This process was created 6 years ago. We have been making a lot of progress, actually, in helping countries look at adaptation, design strategies to address adaptation, both at the national level as well as the sectoral level. And agriculture is obviously a key component of that. I know that in the negotiations, you may get the notion that parties object to agriculture as an important component of the adaptation landscape, but it's the opposite, actually. Agriculture is one of the key sectors, along with ecosystems, water, health, and so forth. And it's not simply to provide food and support food security, but also employment, especially for Africa and the lesser developed countries. So poverty reduction strategies rely and depend on agriculture. Most of the economies depend on commercial agriculture. I think that the community like yourself, to help advance agriculture in the agenda, one of the things that you could do is perhaps I can say it in terms of a hexagon. So in case you want to remember something from what I've said, remember hexagon. There are multiple entry points to how to address adaptation. One of them is, of course, depending on the climate hazards, whether it's floods, droughts, and so forth. The second side of the hexagon are the sectoral ministries themselves. So whether it's the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, Ministry of Health, etc. The third would be perhaps the place itself, whether it's a city or a region, district, etc. Fourth could be perhaps some of the development themes like the SDGs. Fifth is perhaps more specific development themes at the national level. And the sixth side to my hexagon are the actors themselves. There are different organizations and support systems that look at different aspects of the landscape of adaptation. These all combine and mix and help contribute towards achieving progress on systems of agriculture. So whether it's crop production or food security at the national level, etc. So my challenge to you is when you develop your programs, try and address the 6 sides of the hexagon, ensure that whatever you're doing is at scale, that will actually have a demonstrable outcome at the national level. It's not enough to help a village be food secure anymore. I think that you have to look at how does this scale up in terms of achieving SDGs? How does it scale up to achieve employment at the national level? How does it contribute to national food security and so forth? So that scale issue crossing all of these levels is quite important in terms of how you can make an impact. Secondly is perhaps the issue of how do we know we are achieving adaptation? How do we know we're making effective progress towards achieving adaptation? And one of the things perhaps I could challenge you to do is also to as scientists, to use a scientific approach. You're used to developing experiments and testing out hypotheses and so forth. I think it's time we did the same for adaptation. How can we put in place solutions, or at least attempts at adapting that we can then monitor and assess and see what is effective, what doesn't work, and then actually conclude on what is the best bets of achieving progress. I'm glad to reflect on the publication that CCAFS has just produced on best bets for agriculture. I think products like that synthesize the best available science on the topic are quite useful for the policymakers that come here. So we look forward to more of those products, and hopefully this will be the guidance based on science that will help us make progress on adaptation in the coming years.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, Paul. Okay, we move to our second panel member, Olga. Now, Olga, we've heard about technology and practice and national plans and the wonderful hexagon from Paul. But we need policies, institutions, services to address a lot of this risk. And a key part of the risk is that variability and the unknowns that agricultural sector faces. So from your perspective in the Syngenta Foundation, how do we scale up insurance and index insurance for smallholders? And let's remember that this is a group of people who you know, they can't even afford life insurance for themselves, and we're asking them to insure their livestock?
Thank you, Tony. That's very close to our foundation's heart, and I'm very pleased to be here today on behalf of our foundation, hearing for first time the positive steps forward, ensuring that farming does not just remain as a footnote within the climate talks. So when we talk about insurance, I believe if we would shift the name or revise the name insurance for safe farming or safety net, we will be more popular. Insurance is a word that has a strange perception among all of us, and of course the smallholder farmers. So that is already something that is creating a little bit of a barrier, but we have been working since years now through our journey, and we have gained extensive experience. So insurance is a heavy regulated instrument as a microloan. So we need regulation to support these kind of solutions. And when it comes to fintech, when it comes to cyber risks, the regulators, they become a little bit nervous. So we need to be with them and see them also as a facilitator and an enabler to us instead of a restrictor. So that is very important. Behind the regulator, there is a government behind. And as we mentioned this morning, we have to ensure to raise the voice and bring the government on board to create the space for the private sector to become more active and to support the venue. Then, of course, the main issue here, it's the distribution channel is key for access to insurance. So we need to make sure that these distribution channels are affordable. And when it comes to affordability, we need to come up with solutions that they are centric, farmer-centric. So we need to involve the farmers in the product design. We need to try to offer the best solution for the smallholder farmer at the best affordability or at the cheapest price. Technology is for sure one key component as well. So technology needs also regulation behind. So up to now we have been able to implement insurance policies and claim settlements and payouts through M-Pesa in East Africa, and we hope that we can roll out this worldwide. So we need regulation behind and newcomers to implement that too. And last but not least, looking at insurance is not just the end itself. I think we need to think about how to empower risk management tools before it comes to insurance in order to reduce the risk as much as possible and to come up with a solution that is not just in the hands of the smallholder farmer. And so design that need on top before that strong risk management in place. Financial education, capacity building, data investment. This is really crucial. So this is where all comes in one package, Tony. And I think that's what we can share. So we can see already a lot of support from each and every actor within the value chain. We are getting there, but of course we are still at the very initial step in the journey. So that's all we can say.
Great, thanks very much, Olga. And I mean, what a wonderful phrase that you're no longer an insurance salesman or a salesperson, but you're a safety net merchant. Yeah. So next time you sit on an aeroplane next to somebody, ask them if they're a safety net merchant. And that was particularly impressive, Olga, that you spoke without notes, because Olga's been flying around Southeast Asia, 5 countries, on the road for the last 2 weeks, and after this she's immediately getting on another aeroplane to Geneva, so incredibly impressive. Thanks very much. So let's jump to Sophia Haya. And Sophia, we're told by UN Women that it's going to take 124 years to address the SDG on gender. 124 years. We've heard that the feminization of agriculture, a huge amount in there, and the typical response of many researchers is, well, yeah, but I have been counting the number of female farmers. We are building the female researcher pipeline. What else do you want me to do? And what advice do you have for those who don't have quite as nuanced understanding about how we mainstream gender, how we bring gender to the real forefront in the whole climate solution debate?
Okay, thank you, Paul. Sorry, Tony. Well, what I would say to that person is that we still have a really significant gender gap in agriculture. And so, I would agree with you and women that there's still a long way to go. I really hope it doesn't take, over 100 years to resolve this gap. And I think there are things that we can do to make sure it doesn't take that long. I don't know if we have that long. But, we're still at the point where women's access to agricultural inputs, information, credit, other resources and technology is less than that of men, smallholder farmers. You may have heard that FAO has said that if they did have equal access to these resources and services and finance and so forth, women smallholder farmers' production would increase by 20 to 30%, and global food production would increase by 10 to 14% globally. So that's a really significant increase just for the world, never mind for women farmers. But you know, another reason to close this gap is something we've heard about earlier today. Increasing women's income, increasing their status, increases nutrition and food diversity levels within households and communities, as well as education, in particular with children, but also nutrition of the entire household. You know, CCAF's research has showed that women and men smallholder farmers, for many of these reasons, have different levels of vulnerability and different levels of resilience. And so as climate change continues to take effect, women may fall further and further behind in the agricultural gap if we do not take some real strong steps to work with them and improve this situation. You know, they have less access to information and early warning. They tend to be more reliant on natural resources for income and subsistence. And as I said, they've had less decision-making power at household, community, and national levels as well. So in order to close this gap, where should we focus? What are some of the key leverage points? I'll just talk about a few that I've seen make a difference, and I think that we can continue to make a difference in. We need to increase women's decision-making power, and you know, we've all heard this, but it needs to happen at the household level, at the community level, as well as at the national level. And you know, the UNFCCC has been focusing so far on women as negotiators and women as decision makers in the global forums and at the national level, but we really need to be looking farther down as well. You know, CARE, for example, found that if women at the local level are involved in community groups, either producer groups or other groups, as leaders, they actually have greater control over their own income than women who don't. So the difference was twice as much, actually. 69% of women in collectives with women leaders and 62% of women in collectives with mixed gender leaders can control their income, compared to 34% otherwise. So, you know, we're talking about really crucial changes that can be made. CCAFS has also found that women's organizations are an effective medium, effective platform for both increasing women's agricultural production, decreasing their workload, and increasing their community status and confidence. In Nepal, for example, we've worked with a women's organization in a rural village to establish and manage a solar-powered irrigation system, which has not only increased their production by 3 times, so the crops per season increased from 1 to 3, but it decreased their labor loads and has increased their confidence. And these kinds of activities are, I think, a way forward. One of the other issues I think we need to think about is how can we encourage women to move into non-traditional gender, you know, non-traditional roles for women so that they can take advantage of new opportunities. And I'll give you a couple of examples. IFAD in Ghana worked with local communities on commodity chain development and rural infrastructure development. And one of the interesting findings of this is that certain women in some of these communities were able to move into roles and value chains that were traditionally of men, traditionally male roles. For example, they became agro-dealers. They took on tractor service businesses, so they rented or owned tractors and rented them out, and they began to take up business opportunities in industrial crops rather than in subsistent crops. CCAFS has found a similar example in India with the use of large tractors, but it's an open question still. When we did the gender analysis of the use by women of laser land leveling technology, it was found that women did not use the technology. Now, they were not able to access it because of gender and cultural attitudes about the interaction of women with men outside of the community, the access of women to resources, and the few women who did actually use it, something under 10%, only were able to access that technology through their male family members. So, you know, this I think is a really important issue for us to think about. There are ways this can be encouraged, and what can we do to encourage more of this? Related to that is how do we move women into more profitable value chains, possibly value chains where men are, or possibly valuable, profitable value chains based on women's activities and women's preferences. What are these priorities? How can we ensure that women in the value chains are at the more profitable end of the value chains? They're not at the vulnerable end. How is there a role, for example, for women in red meat value chains? We don't often think about that, but actually women make up 2/3 of the world's 600 million small livestock managers. So that will be sheep and goats. So where are women in those value chains? And that is red meat, but that would also be dairy. So how can we build on those places where women are active, and help them benefit more from that? One of the issues that we have been talking about for years and years and years is increasing women's access to land. And that continues to be a really important issue because, of course, how can women participate independently and be empowered in agriculture if they don't have control over land? Now, we do know that by now, 52% of countries in developing regions actually have instituted laws around women's ability to inherit land and other property. But we're finding that at the local level, we're not seeing that 52% of developing countries have women using land equally with men. So how do we break that gap? What are some of the strategies and options, alternative strategies and options that can be used to support women's access? Some of it is just that men's land and men's agricultural activities take priority over women's, so that women may have access to the household land, but can only work it after the men's plots have been taken care of. So that gives them possibly a shorter growing season. It also means that they need different kinds of agricultural information, which is another issue. But there are other options such as land rental, the use of common property land, working with communities and with leaders in communities to come to arrangements that work for women and are not resisted by communities. And moving into climate information, which we've talked about quite a bit here, is it reaching women? Well, we know that there is a global digital gender gap of 11 to 12% globally, but in the developing world it's as high as 30% or over. So, and we also know that in the rural areas the gap is bigger than in the urban areas. So women farmers do not have mobile phones to the same extent than men do. And I think when we're talking climate information, weather information, agro information, we really need to keep that in mind. We need to find different ways of reaching women with information, and we need to ensure that they're interested in reaching information. I just spoke with someone during the break who said they were investigating mobile money transfer for women in a country in Latin America, but it wasn't working out too well for them because of the transaction costs. So because women have lower levels of access to resources, if the information is not valuable to them, they are much less apt to spend the money to access it. And the issue of content for women, information for women that is of value to them, is the kind of information they need, is also really critical. For example, if women are working their land a month or so later than men are, then they're going to need different kinds of climate information. And CCAPS has found that in some regions, women are actually looking for cessation of rainfall information rather than onset of rainfall information, which is what their male family members are looking for. They may be more interested in likelihood of drought later in the season. And so there needs to be some understanding of the different information needs of women and men, but also other groups in a community. And then finally, I'll just quickly, since we're here at the UNFCCC, how do we get gender into climate policy at the global and national levels? It's not there yet. I'm happy to hear that there is a gender action plan that's in final stages of approval, and I'm looking forward very much to seeing that. But we've done some analysis of NDCs, of national climate strategies, national agriculture strategies, and while gender is still kind of in the social side of things, in the social development, in sustainable development, in health, but it's not in agriculture, it's not in energy, it's not in climate strategies, and we need to find a way to bridge that gap.
Thanks, Sophia. That was really powerful examples and giving a much more nuanced understanding of how this all comes about, because we all have biases and perspectives and understanding. And mine was shaken a couple of years ago when my daughter had to write a essay at high school around hunter-gatherers. And she said to me, so does that mean that the men were the hunters and the women were the gatherers? And the men might sit around doing nothing all day or come back with no meat, and they would challenge the women, but we hope you can still feed us because you were out there gathering. And she had this concept of early humans, of the men being quite indolent, and that was her kind of advocacy. But also, as you were talking about the gender action plan, I was also thinking, well, when you challenge these male policymakers, listen, we've got this gender gap, we've got a gap, we've got to fill the gap. And they've given you that acronym, Gender Action Plan. Well, we've solved the gap because now we have a Gender Action Plan, and therefore the problem must be solved. But clearly you've stretched our minds, and this whole dimension of it's a social issue, but we've got to link it up with technology and policy was incredibly powerful. So now we're going to break some new ground in a panel, and the new ground that we're going to break is Jonathan has been doing a great number of studies recently, and the questions that our moderators put up for us and the organizers are great. And he said, well, I'd like to tweak these a little bit. And I've lost his bit of paper. So first of all, an apology to Jonathan. And secondly, a confession to all of you that I'm going to ask the question that we originally had, and he's going to give an answer to a different question. And your task is to try and work out what that real question should have been. And we'll let Jonathan at the end of this tell us, and sorry, I was just looking for it, but I've lost. I have my sincere apologies to you. So, but I do understand you've been working on this link between food systems, value chains, and policy, and this blended approach to sustainability. How do we put that into climate change action? So, is everyone ready? He's going to give an answer, and you've got to guess the question. Go for it, Jonathan.
All right, no problem. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and especially to also represent the German Development Institute and also talk a bit about our project, our civil project, and also our Klimalog projects. I want to start off with just three main big questions that I think it's on my mind. And the first question is, how do we feed the world? And especially dealing with healthy foods and dealing with the problem of hunger in developing countries and the challenge of obesity or overweight in developed countries. That's one first question. The second question is, how do we protect our planet in itself currently? Seeing that agriculture itself contributes to the problem in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions, at least 1/5, or around estimates show 24% to total greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture is certainly part of the problem, and definitely to be part of the solution. Now the third thing is, if we look at the business sector and also the fact that farmers are there to make profits, to improve their welfare, then that also brings in the part of people, and how do we bring our farmers into the whole ballgame of how to feed the world, and especially to also reduce challenges that we are seeing today in terms of depletion of natural resources. So that's the first three big questions that I have in mind. Now, looking at these three big questions, one will say that it's not something that is just happening. What we see is that it's happening within a political system, an institutional setting, and also there are governance challenges that is affecting how to achieve these goals, and especially to achieve the 1.5 or below 2 degrees targets that we are talking about. So certainly agriculture will play a very important role in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, we want to produce more and sustain our planet and also be able to make some profits. Now, looking at these big questions, one will say, well, this is very complex. If we look at people, planet, and profit within a policy and an institutional setup combined with governance challenges. This is certainly complex. And moreover, research and also implementation have sometimes moved away from this complexity to pilot-based approaches where we just want to go on and implement certain programs based on short-term returns and in terms of how to achieve specific goals. But I think it's important to really confront this complexity with complex solutions. And these complex solutions will mean we move away from the current approach and move on to a more systems-based approach. And this systems-based approach also is very much in line with what Paul just mentioned in terms of looking at the different entry points. Now, there will be different approaches and different solutions that one wants to look at. Now, if we look at this, I think one integrated approach will be to look at sustainable food systems as a way to solve the problem or to bring agriculture to a low carbon path. Now, sustainable food systems will also mean that we look at the entire chain from production until it gets to the final consumer and also post-consumption. Now, from these very entry points, if we just look at the production sector alone, what we have now is that we have high use of external input, which is affecting the kind of agriculture that we have now in terms of the practices. One approach will be then to think about moving to bringing in more ecological approaches, if it's agroecology or agroforestry, or conservation practices or climate smart agriculture, or systems of rice intensification, and other strategies that will put agriculture on a low carbon path. But at the same time, we also don't want to miss the fact that there are technologies that have been developed, and these technologies would also help to put agriculture on a low carbon path. So this is where the blended sustainability concept comes in, that there are ecological issues that needs to be dealt with. At the same time, we have economic issues that we want to deal with. And we also have people in terms of the social setup within a policy and institutional environment. Now, certainly there will be trade-offs. So if we want to improve ecological or we want to achieve an ecological goal, what it means is that we want to move more into ecological practices. Now, that will mean that to some extent, from the initial stages of making such a move, studies have shown that, well, it can affect profits, and that can also affect livelihoods. But at the same time, we also want to recognize that there are people and economics involved, people in terms of the social setting and also livelihoods and the poor farmers and also the economics component. So there will definitely be trade-offs if we want to improve our ecological goal or if we want to improve our economic goal or social goal. There will be trade-offs. So it's important to recognize that these trade-offs will be there. Now, from these trade-offs, we can also think about what will be the synergies among the different goals. Now, if there are synergies between, let's say, using improved varieties, for example, and also reducing deforestation, could that be a goal that we want to achieve? Now, from this, one would say that we will have to think about the whole system and think about the sustainability in terms of a blended approach where technology will play a role and ecology and also economics or profit will play a central role. And whilst minimizing one and increasing the other will help us to achieve the overall growth and especially also to achieve the kind of transformation that we are talking about. Now, if we move from the production setup, we want to then move on to looking at processing, for example, if we want to process the different crops that we have. Currently, what we have is that at least 30% of our food is lost as a result of post-harvest losses, especially in developing countries. Now, this can do a lot in terms of alleviating hunger and also improving welfare. Now, one thing that one can think about, which technologies will help to reduce this as a way, and especially also to think about farmers and how to improve their welfare. And this is where the need for digital technology also comes in. If we think about applying a blockchain application concept as an example, this can be a way to improve the current situation and also to minimize losses during the consumption stage. So I think the main point here is to move then to a more systems-oriented approach rather than just single projects.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, and apologies as well for losing the bit of paper. So we come to our second round of questions, and we're going to take a very quick round here because we do want to reserve some time for the audience to interact. So in the same way that Twitter only allows you 140 characters, we're going to ask you to speak within 140 words, okay, in reacting to this. So firstly to you, Paul, and it's around the value of science. And remember, science is it's a noun, it's not a verb, so we don't do good science, but science is a body of knowledge. Now, can that body be neutral? We know since Kyoto and Paris Agreement, there are over 1 million articles about climate change and the role of humans. Was it anthropogenically induced? And more than 90% of them said it was. So that's seen as consensus by many, but refuted by others. So can we get to this climate kind of, the science neutral space where we have evidence and maybe the interpretation of it could differ, but the soundness of it is there, or is that just wishful thinking on behalf of researchers who want to be valued more or come out of the closet or whatever?
That counts for 3 words. Well, science is a difficult issue. I think, and many of us started off as scientists, and then you gradually work towards sort of applying your science to important questions of policy and application and so forth. I think the important thing is to do the best available science you can do as objectively as you can, and conclude and convey messages that you come up with without being prejudiced or become a lobbyist against a certain mindset. That's important. The Paris Agreement and all these other agreements with the Sendai and so forth are full of well-negotiated agreements as to what the targets ought to be and reference points and so forth. Under the Paris Agreement, for instance, we have the sort of the policy decision on what to base future assessments on in terms of the global goal for adaptation. It's just a less than 2 degrees global temperature rise, for instance. That implies that when policymakers are going to be making decisions about how to adapt to climate change, they're going to constrain themselves to a future of less than 2 degrees. I know that a lot of scientists do not believe that or will not accept that, so they will almost explore a whole range of temperatures. That I don't believe that we're going to achieve less than 2 degrees. I believe it's most likely going to be 3 or 4 or 5 degrees. So I'm going to develop science and advise my policymakers to maybe go towards a 4-degree world. I think this is the confusion that arises from people that make science with being a lobbyist against a certain outcome. I think it's important to explore the continuum between just coping to climate change and unplanned adaptation and loss and damage measures and so forth. And these targets in the agreements help us take care of that. For instance, for adaptation, I would imagine that if I was a policymaker, I would be planning against a less than 2 degree world, but I would also be putting contingent measures in place in case we don't achieve the less than 2 degrees, so using insurance or other measures and so forth. So we have to look at the whole landscape of solutions and then use science to help the policymakers to decide on what are the thresholds of their decision making and how do they balance or optimize the resource investments into the different types of solutions, etc. And then learn from experience. There are a lot of events that are happening pretty much every month, every week. There's a lot of wealth of information to be collected from how people are responding, what the impacts are, and use that in a scientific manner to actually advise people on how to best respond to future impacts and events.
Thanks, Paul. And Paul assures me that was 140 words. It's just that everything else was in square brackets. Great. Olga, in 140 words, please, could you explain, if insurance is one of those innovations we're looking at, we're also looking at microfinance, we're looking at IT systems, we're looking at other innovations. How do we package those all together for real transformation?
Yeah. So first of all, he mentioned insurance, isn't it? 2 years ago, he would tell me, oh no, this one again. So that's already a good step. So yeah, it comes to a holistic approach, Tony. We really want our foundation, our work in the insurance space. We want climate insurance solutions, microfinance, agriculture development to form a holistic support and come together for powerful agricultural impact and outcome. And so what the rivers is actually enhance the resilience of smallholder farmers through access to insurance solutions, enabling also the graduation from poverty by the reducing or removing those risks from their shoulders and further invest confidently in their farms. Expand financial inclusion by encouraging lenders, microfinance institutions, banks to increase agricultural lending is fundamental, and to ensure business continuity of farmers and lenders, such as MFIs through major natural disasters that they are also there. And that comes to a greater collaboration between the three levels, from micro, meso level up to the government level. Is that 140? Is that okay?
Great, 139. Thanks very much. So moving to Sophia, you spoke a little bit about the need to shift the paradigms to ensure these enabling policies, to look at it. But, you know, can you share also with us the challenges in trying to do that? What are the things that we'll need to have in place to ensure that gender transformation?
Okay, well, you mentioned policymakers. Let me expand.
And given
on
that
a
it's
little bit.
gender, we're going to let you have 280 words.
Well, I only have 140 planned, but but I'm sure I can expand. In terms of policy, you know, I mentioned national level and global policy around climate is still really lacking a lot of significant gender in terms of how do women, how are women affected by climate change? How do they respond? What kind of support do they need? What kind of capacity development? But, you know, even at that level, we're starting to make progress. NDCs, NAPs, some of the, you know, countries, for example, in Africa are starting to develop gender and climate strategies. So this is starting to happen. But where we still see a huge gap is at the level of local policy and subnational policy, where policymakers may not be aware of gender policies at from the national level, or if they are, they may have no idea of how to implement such policy and how to develop programs for women. So I think that there needs to be an understanding of how national policy trickles down to the local level and can make a difference in the lives of women and men, and whether that's about capacity development of policymakers or multi-stakeholder meetings at the local level among policymakers, researchers, civil society, women's groups and so forth, to understand the implications of policy for the lives of women and men and young people at the grassroots level is really an important area for moving forward, because you can have all kinds of beautiful policies at the national level, but if they're not understood and acted on at the local level, it's not going to make a difference. The other area I'd like to talk about, partly because I've been informed that today is National Children's Day in India, so in honor of that, I'd like to talk about the role of young women and men in technology and using technology for agriculture, and that it's about mobile phones, but it's also about increasing digitization, as we've heard earlier. This week, I was at a panel where the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture showed us a video about the use of drones in agriculture to assess the quality and the status of crops and the use of cropland. You know, if we're not careful, it's only the young men who are going to be in a position to use these technologies and take advantage of these technologies, not only in terms of owning them, but also understanding how they work, getting education to operate them and understand how to work with the information that comes from them and analyze results. I just lost my train of thought. But so I think that's an area where we really need to be aware that young women also have a lot to offer in this field and would be happy to take on these new skills and opportunities as well. And how will that happen? And talking about data, you know, big data was another topic that came up this week, big data for agriculture and so forth. And, you know, where is the sex disaggregation of big data? You know, where is sex disaggregation and gender in the iCloud, in the cloud? We know that beyond tracking consumer preferences. So, you know, when are we going to get beyond understanding women as shoppers online? And when are we going to understand that there's a lot more that women can accomplish and benefit from online? For example, Wikipedia is you know, something we all know. It's a very popular source of sharing information and knowledge. University of Oxford did an analysis of Wikipedia contributors, and over half of them are young males from either Europe or America. So that says a lot not only about gender, but it also says a lot about who's constructing knowledge for this next century. And, you know, women editors are even, you know, almost non-existent. So actually the editor role is primarily also young male. So, but, you know, what does it say about the contribution of people from different parts of the world? Apparently there are more Wikipedia contributors in the Netherlands than in all of Africa. So, you know, I think this is an issue that we all need to be thinking about as well, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of social inclusion and youth in the developing world. How can they take advantage of this? And the final comment to make, since I have 280 words, so I'll use my last 40 words or so on the need to really, you know, we've been talking about index insurance and so forth. We really need to understand how women can have access to these different types of security nets. You know, women are not yet using index insurance to a great extent. They could. Some of the barriers that we've been finding in our initial research is that is financial literacy. It's not necessarily access to resources, but it's sometimes a different attitude towards the degree of risk that they're willing to accept or think is likely. So there needs to be an understanding of how we can develop innovative models for social security nets for women as well as men that go beyond cash transfers, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing, and microcredit, but we need to actually give women, you know, work with women as well as men to have an ongoing sustainable mode for providing this sort of support. Thank you.
Great. Good. So Jonathan, you introduced us to this concept of blended sustainability. It's a lovely term. And one of the takeaways from it was, well, if you have a simple problem, don't design a complex solution for it. But if you have a complex problem, don't think that a simple solution will fix it. And so in trying to come to a complex solution to a complex problem, such as climate change, how do we develop, what are the approaches to have those complex solutions where you are blending the social, the financial, the ecological perspectives together? How do we reconcile the need for progress, but also recognize that complexity?
Well, I think, first of all, starting with the concept itself, I think if we look at the political economy angle of this, there are different understandings in terms of what is sustainability and what is not sustainable. So the first thing is for all of us to really recognize these differences and divergent opinions, first of all, among the concept itself and among the different actors who are in this field. And one of the things here will be to, first of all, see what is the understanding of, let's say, the ecological practices that we need. If we talk about ecological practices, for example, the use of GMOs, or if we talk about the use of external inputs such as agrochemicals, or if we think about the economics perspective, I mean, is it all just about making profits? I mean, what about the people who are in the field? So first of all, there is a need to recognize the divergent opinions and try to reconcile this through a more multi-stakeholder approach. And I think this will be very beneficial to, first of all, reconcile the different ideas and to really make real progress when it comes to sustainability. That will be the first thing here. Now, the second thing will be also to think in terms of a systems approach. So if it's definitely a systems approach, then what will work in Germany might not necessarily work in Ghana. And we need to look at a different ecology and think about what works where and why. And this will mean that we need to look at things also from a farmer-led approach in terms of what the farmers think is the real need on the ground. Now, if we use this, then we'll be able to, first of all, solve the problem and also meet the sustainability need that we need to drive agricultural development.
Great, thanks very much. Super. So now we're going to come to the audience, and given that we are trying to address our gender action plan, typically, as you saw in the first session, it is a gentleman like myself with white hair and slightly older and male and white that jump to the microphone first. So we're going to give the female members of the audience the first round of questions, okay? We'll have a second round, but first round of questions, please, females only. State your name, and please avoid a long narrative like some of those white grey-haired gentlemen did, and jump to your question. And you can either address it to one member of the panel or a general question that they'll try and reflect back to you with. So please, ladies, don't make me look like a fool by not asking a question. Or more of a fool than I am, sorry. Thank you.
A very quick question. What is the penetration rate of microinsurance what is the penetration rate of microinsurance among small farmers in Africa at this time, and what kind of insurance exactly do they have? I mean, what are the terms and the et cetera?
Great, let's take 3 or 4 questions as a bundle.
Thanks. I'm Electric. I'm with CCAPS, and I just want to touch on something that came up earlier today, where Bruce mentioned that there was a decision on agriculture on the Substar. And since the topic of this is transforming agriculture for the future, I was wondering if someone on the panel or all of the panelists would say something about how they think this decision can help transforming agriculture for the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks. One last question.
My name is Ibrahim Kaya. How we can start now present, where we can say now we can start to to handle with climate change. Did you understand?
No, sorry.
Okay.
So,
firstly, we need a present where we, as humanity, can say now we have understand the climate is changing, and we start to handle it.
Okay, so awareness that we have climate change, and what are the concrete steps we're going to do to adapt? Yeah, so adaptation issue. Is that adequate reflection of your question?
We have to understand the industry all kind of pollution, that there is we have to understand that there is a thought of acting. When is the present that we can say now we have all understand that we have to deal.
Great. That might have been Jonathan's missing question from me. Great. To the panel, very short because we want to have a second round of questions, and then you are going to get a chance at the end to give a very brief summing up, okay, of your perspective. So let's start at the other end. Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I got the question very well, but if generally we talk about the issue about awareness in terms of where we are now in the stream of time, I think generally there is a lot of awareness unless we want to bring Donald Trump into the picture. But many people really know what is going on in terms of climate change and how this is affecting us as humans, affecting the planet. And definitely the idea is how to do something about this and what to do. And I think for a forum like this, the ideas that have come out from the different sections are all things that I think are actionable plans that we can feed into the policy process itself, and also to serve as evidence for what really needs to be done and how to implement this for real change or real transformation to take place.
Great. Sophia?
This may be take the place of my closing remarks, or I might build on it. But I think, in all of this, the policy and the action, we need to recognize that there's no one homogeneous kind of person that policy can do something for. There needs to be that understanding of the disaggregation by sex, by age, by socioeconomic class, by ethnicity, by region, that different groups have different contributions that they can make to adaptation, to mitigation, or they may suffer different consequences from the impacts of these. But I think we also need to get away from this kind of dealing with the vulnerable, but we need to understand that different groups in society have different sets of capacities and different perspectives and needs in relation to climate policy and action.
Thank you. On the decision on agriculture, I think it does provide an entry point for all of you experts to submit information and work together with the constituted bodies under the convention. These are the bodies that develop common methodologies for countries to apply when they're developing their plans, whether it's NDCs or NAPs and so forth. What this decision does is to allow you to provide your best available methodologies and science and understanding on how to address the issue of adaptation for the agriculture sector. Is it going to transform agriculture? I think 5 years from now, we hope that with your very direct inputs into this process, there will be not common but consistent approaches to addressing adaptation so that we can support the best available solutions to agriculture and other sectors, as well as be able to monitor and verify that in fact we are doing the best that's possible to do with the resources that are available. So I'm hoping that this will enable and facilitate your inputs a lot more than in the past. Whether it's going to actually transform the agriculture sector, I think that's up to you in terms of what you advance and you push and guide the countries to embrace in terms of the policies that they're going to be implementing.
Great throwback. Thank you.
Penetration rate in insurance. I would have wished another kind of question, like what is the impact rate on the ground. So, yeah, I can talk about East Africa, where we are mostly act, but there is a world beyond Africa, I used to say. And we are training insurance companies and designing products jointly with insurance companies and the reinsurer to increase, the knowledge of weather index insurance, which is what makes sense in the space where we do work. Indemnity insurance is far too expensive for the smallholder farmers we want to serve, and index insurance is picking up. I can tell you that in Kenya, it's about 20%. Now, the potential of that is really, really huge, and we need to bring it to a commercial approach in order to increase the volumes that they are needed for the appetite of the insurer to come in and also the reinsurer. So the potential is huge. I cannot give you just a precise figure worldwide, but it's already picking up. So. In Kenya, it's about 20%. Now, what the impact? Correct. Correct.
Great. So with the indulgence of the organisers, because we're quite uncertain about when the finishing time is because of our adjusted programme, let's have a second round of questions, and we can have everyone from the audience, gentlemen in the front, and then Olu.
Thank you. Thank you for all of the presentations. My name is Rodrigo Lima from Brazil. The decision on agriculture and what's going to happen in the next at least 2 years about discussing what are sustainable systems and how to build upon this, thinking about mitigation and adaptation. I would like to hear your views about the policy design implications and discussions that we will need to manage to try to support different countries to really implement policies to be able to put these different systems on the ground, because when we're talking about insurance, for instance, that is one very important tool, index approach more specifically. But the different systems of agriculture that can take place relies a lot on government capacity and the ability to subsidize, to at least at the beginning, to bring innovative solutions to the table. How do you see policy design about this? Thank you.
Great. Olu?
Thank you very much. My name is Olu Ajayi. I work with CTA. My first question is to Olga. Thank you very much for the new name you suggested. I think calling it safe farming, I think it's much more, I think it resonates well better than insurance. But you see, you rightly pointed out that insurance is highly regulated. Okay? And to make insurance ready, to make farmers insurance ready, there's a lot of issues with data that requires public investment, public goods. To what extent, from your own experience, do you think that the governments are willing to make this public investment into insurance? Now, sorry, Tony, just last question. It's to you, Jonathan. You talked about systems and products. This is very, very good. The farmers themselves they have been practicing systems approach for over generations. I think it's resonates with what you are saying. And my question is, to what extent do you think farmers should be encouraged as co-creators of knowledge on climate change, learning from them on the indigenous practices on climate change that they've been doing over the years? Thank you.
Great. And I think there's one gentleman here in the red, and then we'll have to have coffee time talks afterwards.
Thank you very much. My name is Anselm Ebing from Regeneration International, and I have a question for Jonathan. I really liked what you were presenting, and I wondered whether you could give a concrete example of, you mentioned that he's done research, or I don't know exactly the nature of your work, but it was quite conceptual and sounded great, and I wonder whether you can give some concrete examples of that applied, or of the research you've done with regard to the concepts you presented.
Great. So I'm being told that we have 6 minutes remaining for the whole session. So what I'm going to ask you to do is the panelists to respond to those questions, to do them justice, and give us your closing soundbite. What is the take-home message for those who are going to send a social media message or want to tell their friends, you know, what a great afternoon. I came to the Agricultural Advantage closing session, and wow, the closing panel had these key messages for us. So just reflect on that for a moment, respond to those questions, key message, and we've got to do all of that in 5.5 minutes and sum up. So very, very short intervention. Let's start at this stage with Jonathan, please.
Well, I think I would try to answer that question with more of some keywords. So one will be, as I said, in terms of the sustainable food systems, I think there are some approaches that have been applied already, and we find evidence in the field. I recently came back from Zambia, where farmers are already practicing conservation agriculture, for example. In this case, minimal tillage and also crop rotation. So one thing we see here is that the strategies or the practices are already being applied, and I think in terms of co-creation of knowledge, basically we need farmer-led approaches, farmer-led innovations, and also be able to upskill and outskill some of these strategies. I think we need to generally make agriculture itself very sexy for the youth so that they themselves can also get involved. Apart from that, one last remark would be, I think we need to break the silos, move away from the current pilot-based approaches, and move more to transdisciplinary research and also program implementation.
Okay, well, I'll start by alluding to Bruce's presentation this afternoon and saying for agricultural transformation, we need gender transformation. And to really adapt and deal with climate change, we really need to recognize that women are active agents. They have capacities, they have knowledge, they have experience, they have perspectives and concerns that may be the same as other members of their community, may be different, and that we need to ensure that all voices are heard and all capacities are supported.
Thank you. On the issue of how policy design should change at the national level, my thinking is that it all needs to be very harmonized across the different modalities available to address climate change. We talk about NDCs, that's a national ambition to address climate change, but it's supported by the plans of actions themselves, whether it's for mitigation or adaptation through the NAPs and for mitigation through NAMAs and so forth. I think the country has to manage the integrated nature of all of these and ensure that the policies enable some of these actions to actually take place and effectively, as well as and then assess some of the policies, whether it's incentives or whatever, to make sure that they are actually contributing to national development. And if things don't work, to be able to be brave enough to phase them out and replace them with something more effective. So I guess the key message then would be that perhaps a holistic and integrative approach to how we do work would be the key message from our interventions.
Just maybe participation from the government support is key, but it's not only in the hands of the government. As Paul just mentioned, I think it got to be an integrated approach forward, the public sector, the private sector, researchers, practitioners, all together. So when it comes about premium subsidy, we need to think about smart subsidization and invest in the gaps that are needed. Data is one of them. So sustainable approaches. So I couldn't agree more with Paul. When we need here, there are really integrated approaches where each and every contribution comes together with the same mission and vision. So thank you very much.
Yeah, great, thanks very much. So in closing, Paul reminded us that if we do go to a 4-degree world, we're going to end up with a 4-letter outcome. Olga reminded us insurance products really are about risk identification and risk management. Jonathan gave us the concept of blended sustainability, and although it's complex, we've got to start with farmers. And Sophia challenged us that to have an agricultural transformation, we really need to have a gender transformation in actions, views, and biases. So one thought in closing. We had the INDCs at Paris, the INDCs. We now have NDCs. We've lost the I. But actually, we need to bring it back, because it should be the individually determined contributions. Each of you in the room is responsible for about 10 tons of CO2. What are you going to do? Easy to point the fingers at policymakers, the UN, foundations, researchers, institutes. What are you going to do to make sure that climate actions make a difference? And then we will have our IDCs and we will have progress. So please show a warm round of appreciation to our wonderful panel, Paul Desanka, Olga Specker, Jonathan Mockshell, and Sophia Heyer. Please join me in giving them a warm round of congratulations.